Good to have you here again. A ship has been asleep at the bottom of the sea for 64 years. When a remote submersible swept its lights across the deck for the first time this month, the team on board expected rust. A skeleton. 60-plus years underwater usually leaves nothing but a shape, a hull collapsing slowly into silt, stripped of anything that once made it a ship. That's not what came back on the monitors. Coral was growing across the bow. Cod drifted through the gap where a mast had come down. Somewhere in the wreckage, a wolffish had made a den out of what used to be a cabin. And for hundreds of meters in every direction, nothing. Flat, empty mud, no coral, no fish, no color at all. One dead ship. More life crowded onto it than anywhere nearby. This is not a coincidence. And by the end of this video, I don't think you'll think it's really about the ship at all. Here's the part almost nobody thinks about first. On most of the ocean floor, there's nothing to hold on to. A coral larva drifting through open water is looking for one thing. Something hard and stable to settle on before it can start building a skeleton of its own. So is a barnacle. So is almost anything in the ocean that doesn't spend its whole life swimming. But across huge stretches of seafloor, there simply isn't one. Just soft sediment, mud and sand, shifting slightly with the current, offering nothing to attach to and nothing to hide behind. Then, in an afternoon, which is nothing at all, in geological time, something impossible happens. A hard surface the size of a building drops out of nowhere and lands in the middle of that emptiness. It's not that life didn't want to be there before, it's that there was never anywhere to stand. Once that surface exists, it doesn't fill slowly. It fills almost immediately, and it fills densely. Not just more life, but more kinds of life than the surrounding seafloor can support. A shipwreck a few hundred meters down can end up hosting a wider range of species, packed into a tighter space, than the barren mud around it will ever hold. It isn't just more crowded. It's a different kind of place entirely, a city dropped into a desert. And at some point, without really meaning to, we noticed the same thing happening over and over. Fishing crews kept finding the same pattern near old wrecks in completely different oceans. More fish gathered around a sunken hull than anywhere else nearby, every single time, whether the wreck was 10 years old or 100. Nobody planned that. Nobody built it on purpose. It just kept happening. We didn't invent the artificial reef. We copied it. Once the pattern became impossible to ignore, it stopped being an accident and became a strategy. Retired warships, decommissioned oil platforms, old subway cars stripped and cleaned, all now deliberately sunk in chosen locations for the sole purpose of making life do exactly what it was already doing near every wreck we'd ever found by accident. There's an entire industry today built around manufacturing, on purpose, the thing a sinking ship makes for free. We didn't discover a trick nature was hiding from us. We found its homework lying open on the desk and copied the answer. So maybe this is just an ocean thing. A quirk of water, salt, and coral larvae looking for a home. If this were only about the ocean, it would be a curiosity. But it isn't. It's a law. Except walk into an old-growth forest and look down at a fallen tree. Not one that fell last week. One that's been lying there so long it's gone soft underfoot, sinking slowly back into the forest floor, more shape than wood. That tree, while it was alive, was mostly just doing what every tree does, standing in one place, competing with its neighbors for light, holding territory. Useful but ordinary. Down, it becomes something else entirely. Fungi move in first, threading through the decaying wood. Then moss, then insects, then, and this is the part that made foresters give this thing an actual name, tree seedlings, rooting directly into the decomposing trunk and growing in a straight, visible line down its entire length. Because for meters in any direction, that dead log is the only surface rich and stable enough to grow on. Ecologists call it a nurse log, a fallen tree that ends up supporting more new life in its slow decay than it ever hosted while it was standing. A ship at the bottom of an ocean, a tree on the floor of a forest. Two completely different ecosystems, two different states of matter, one wet and one dry, thousands of miles apart, running the exact same program. That's not a coincidence anymore. That's a pattern with a name. So what's actually going on here? It's tempting to say death creates life. It's a nice sentence. It's also not quite right. What's actually happening is smaller and colder than that. A hard surface in an ocean of soft mud. A fallen trunk on a shaded forest floor. Neither one is valuable because something died. Both are valuable because for a moment they are empty, and empty, it turns out, is a condition nature does not seem willing to tolerate for very long, anywhere we've looked. There's a word for this in biology, and it's colder than empty. It's a niche, a role that exists in an ecosystem, whether or not anything is currently there to fill it. A way of living, a set of resources, a position that's available the instant the space opens up, regardless of what used to occupy it. We tend to picture evolution as a fight, the strong pushing out the weak, competition as the whole story. But looking at this pattern, that might be the wrong picture. It might be less like a fight and more like filling in the blanks. Nature rarely asks what used to be here. If that's true at the scale of a shipwreck or a single fallen tree, it should also hold at the largest scale we know how to measure. Roughly 250 million years ago, something happened that wiped out the overwhelming majority of species alive on Earth at the time, the largest mass extinction in the planet's recorded history. And roughly 66 million years ago, the age of the dinosaurs came to an end, most likely, according to the leading explanation, when an object roughly the size of a mountain struck what is now the coast of Mexico. The exact trigger is still debated among scientists. What isn't debated is what came after. Across nearly every version of the story, the dinosaurs were gone, and one of the largest ecological vacancies life has ever produced was suddenly, completely open. Both times, the story usually gets told as a story about death, an ending. But look at what happened in the millions of years that followed each one. Life didn't just recover. It diversified faster and into more new forms than it had in the tens of millions of years before the disaster. New body plans, new ways of moving, eating, surviving, ways of living that simply hadn't existed while the previous dominant species were still occupying every available role. It's tempting to say the disaster caused the progress. Most paleontologists would push back on that, and they'd be right to. The disaster didn't build anything. What it did was smaller and more honest than that. It emptied the building. What moved in afterward did that on its own, filling roles that had simply, for the first time in tens of millions of years, become available. Mammals didn't outcompete the dinosaurs. They moved into a structure the dinosaurs had been occupying, almost uncontested, for over 100 million years, the moment it finally, suddenly, had a vacancy. A shipwreck, a fallen tree, a mass extinction. Three completely different fields: ocean ecology, forest biology, deep evolutionary time. And all three are quietly describing the same underlying rule, just at wildly different scales. Nature does not leave a valuable space empty for long, and it rarely asks what used to be there. It only asks what can live there now. Which brings us back to a ship in the Labrador Sea. It was bought in 1921 by a polar explorer named Ernest Shackleton, originally to sail for the Canadian Arctic. When that expedition lost its funding at the last minute, he took the ship south instead to Antarctica, where a sudden heart attack ended his life on board the following year. The ship outlived him by decades, working as a sealing vessel off Newfoundland and Labrador, before ice finally crushed its hull and it went down in 1962. It lay in the dark, unseen for the next 64 years. It was bought to be a vehicle for exploration. And 64 years after it stopped moving. That's still, somehow, exactly what it is. Just not the kind anyone standing on its deck in 1921 could have predicted. The explorers now are marine biologists. The frontier now is 400 meters straight down. The ship never really stopped being what it was built to be. It just quietly changed who was doing the exploring. Nature rarely asks what used to be here. It asks what can live here now. Shipwrecks aren't the only kind of ruin. Cities have them too. I'm Leo. This is Pattern Notes. We gather here and stories pass through us. This was one of them. See you next time.